It was the first in Europe and the second in the world, a brilliant product of the Enlightenment. It raised the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth's hopes, but didn't shield it from ultimate destruction. The extinction of the Commonwealth in 1795 was one of the greatest European tragedies. So, what does the Constitution of the 3rd of May hold for Poland and Eastern Europe today? Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, once a powerful European entity, had seen its golden age wane due to internal conflicts and the manipulative politics of neighboring powers. The liberum veto, a parliamentary procedure allowing any member of the parliament to terminate the current session and nullify any legislation already passed, had paralyzed the nation's political system. Thus, coupled with the First Partition of Poland in 1772 by Russia, Prussia and the Habsburg Empire, highlighted the urgent need for reform. Influenced by the Enlightenment and the recent American Constitution, Polish reformers, including King Stanisław August Poniatowski and prominent figures like Hugo, Kołłątaj, Ignacy, Potocki, sought to strengthen the state through a new constitution. The May 3rd Constitution aimed to transform the Commonwealth into a more effective constitutional monarchy. Its establishment is celebrated each year by both Poland and Lithuania.
The Constitution of the 3rd of May is a unique document which was the second in the world and the first in Europe to formulate the principle of the separation of powers and in general to chart the principles of the modern lawmaking, and it was perhaps somewhat ahead of the processes that were starting in Europe.
The adoption of the constitution was met with hostility from neighboring powers, especially from Prussia and Russia. The subsequent Polish-Russian War of 1792, supported by the Targowice Confederation compromise of anti-reform Polish magnates, led to the Commonwealth's defeat. The constitution was in force for less than 19 months before being annulled by the Grodno Sejm in 1793. The second and third partitions of Poland followed, erasing Poland's sovereignty for over a century. Despite its short life, the May 3rd Constitution became a symbol of national pride and the enduring hope for Poland's eventual restoration of sovereignty, which was realized 123 years later after World War I.
Our guest today is Marcin Kaczorowski, the chairman of the Memory of Nations Foundation here in Warsaw. Welcome to the programme.
Good to be here.
We're both wearing our red and white cockades. We're celebrating the Constitution Day, 3rd of May, the Constitution of 3rd of May, 1791. So I suppose we as historians know a fair bit about it, but can you tell us what it is, and is that knowledge still shared, or how is that knowledge shared with Polish high school pupils today? What's the status?
It is an amazing attempt of a nation surrounded by its enemies to repair its political system. And the different fractions of the patriotic, different wings of the patriotic fraction put their heart into it, put their bank into it to make it the most marvelous political system in Europe at the time, perhaps the wisest. Because, well, the first...
In what way? How would you...
The first constitution in Europe, surely, yes. Yeah. Well, we may say that the French was more democratic and giving more citizenship rights to everyone. But we can see how the process was, in the end, perhaps even too radical, and then overtaken by the most radical fractions of the French Revolution, which ended up in genocide in Vendée, where the peasants are massacred by the radicals. And in Poland, the process was planned to be gradual. And that's, I would say, that's the greatest wisdom of the initiators of the constitution. So Ignacy Potocki, King Stanisław August Poniatowski, Stanisław Malachowski and Hugo Kołłątaj. And that was their wisdom, because they wanted to initiate this process of inclusion of all social layers, but slowly. And they left gaps, and they left empty pages with the idea that this is to be developed in the future. So then the whole society, whole nation should be made a political nation, should be empowered. So that's the greatest wisdom. So basically the nobility, which represent about 10% of the Polish kingdom's society, Polish kingdom's nation, they had the power in their hands. However, there was certain important side effects because the poorest Szlachta with no land were influenced by, we could say today, the oligarchs,
yes.
and they were corrupted by the richest landowners, and that was actually they got rid of that in the constitution. So that there was census, there was certain wealth the threshold that would allow the people to vote.
And the infamous liberum veto, which allowed a single member of parliament
was eradicated
to halt any proceedings.
Which, of course, Catherine II was interested in. She wanted to make sure it never disappears so that Poland's reforms could be paralyzed forever. And that was actually the deal they made with Prussia since 1720s. There was a secret deal, which we can find it in the correspondence, that because the Russians opened their archives for 10 years till, I believe, 2000, where we can see there is always a secret deal between Prussia and Russia that were basically rivals in many aspects. But they always wanted to make sure that nothing changes in Poland, liberum veto stays forever, and they will decide about who is the king.
What was the model for this very, as you say, very bold constitution? Was it the American model? Was it an English constitutional monarchy model? The general climate of the Enlightenment?
I would say the English actually followed the Polish model, because if you think about the nihil novi constitution 1505, the English adopted 1688 to ultimately make Britain constitutional monarchy. The parliament prevailed for hundreds of years, and constitution nihil novi made sure that the king won't change anything without the consent of the nobility. So that's, I would say, the balance tilts towards the more influence of the nobility than the king. So these are actually hundreds of years of Polish parliamentarism that accumulate in this single act. Because if we think about this, the act of Polish-Lithuanian Union from the end of the 16th century was later very closely studied in England by Elizabeth I when she initiated the English-Scottish Union. So we can see, well, the Polish parliamentarism was, I would say, the avant-garde in Europe throughout the ages. And it's a bit of completely forgotten aspect of Polish history, kind of grey area. And
because it was a highly sophisticated state to begin with, wasn't it?
That's right, but also Russians and Peter the Great. There's one great thing he did for Russia. He made sure that Russian propaganda will prevail on different courts. And this is how he sought to destroy Poland, which also the Catherine effectively continued. For example, Voltaire was bribed by Russians to depict Poland as a backward, stupid and brutal civilization, if civilization at all. So therefore the message sent to the West was, it's actually good that Poland's disappearing, plus it didn't change the balance of power between the great powers on the continent at the time. So that's why we may say that disappearance of Poland didn't disturb the other powers.
The constitution of 1791 didn't envisage that Poland would be destroyed. Poland-Lithuania would be destroyed, but that's what happened. So a great drama, a tragic drama in European history. Can you just give us a brief outline of why these three great empires that bordered Poland wanted to destroy Poland completely?
Let's start perhaps from Prussia, that at the end of 18th century was all about barracks, and barracks everywhere. So huge army, as Norman Davies put it, magnificent international parasite that amassed huge numbers of soldiers in order to conquer the neighbors. And so they would benefit the most from destruction of Poland because they could take over the Poland's heartland. When they won Silesia, that much earlier belonged to Poland, in the war against Austria, that 45% of their income for the Prussian treasure came from Silesia, so we can see what kind of wealth it is. Plus rich agricultural areas, plus Gdańsk. Gdańsk represented 80% of Poland's exports at that time and was the gateway to the West, of course, trade with with Britain, with Holland, and even with Spain. We're talking about grain trade.
Yep.
Taking over the Valley of Vistula was absolutely crucial to gaining more power in the region. Russia, on the other hand, wanted to gain access to the heartland of Europe, and even decide about the German business, so the Reich's political situation. And Austria wanted to compensate certain losses that they suffered at the hands of the Prussians. They were, of course, enemies, and they were becoming the weaker partner in this trio.
We know that in 1795 Poland-Lithuania ceased to exist. What was the legacy of the constitution for subsequent generations? Did it become just a romantic ideal of Polish identity, or did it have any specific concrete items of legacy that it could bequeath to future generations?
It's a great question. Thank you for this. I had the utmost pleasure of discussing this subject with the author of an upcoming dramatized biography of Ignacy Potocki, Agnieszka Springate-Bakiński. She's absolutely expert on the subject of Mr. Potocki. And I think he showcases exactly what Poland is about and what Poland could be today, and what examples we can take from those people who sacrificed everything to save the sinking ship, Polish kingdom. Ignacy Potocki, powerful aristocrat from a very important family, who is a friend of the bourgeois, is a friend of the peasants. He's one of the most liberal people, most knowledgeable experts in politics in Europe at the time. The youngest head of Freemasonry, national level in Europe at the time, and who, by the way, changed the Freemasonic oath to make sure Poland comes first, not the Freemasonic organization. And he's the best example of the best people from the rich layers that did everything they could to unite the nation that was divided by different social interests, social layers, differences. And I think the greatest gift of the Third May's constitution is that Poles tend to identify personal freedom and in human rights, we could say it this way, with the patriotic zeal. It's an incredible effort. Of course, in Polish tradition, where the king was not some distant tyrant, but simply primus and inter pares, the first amongst equals. Why we see that certain traditions also lived very long. The Prussian military tradition of very harsh discipline, that's what was needed to create nazism later. And also that lived in the ranks of NKVD. Well, we know that Catherine taught Russians the Prussian methods in the army, and the famous saying that the soldier should fear more his commanders than the enemy. So all those 18th century ideas, they have very long life, and they still continue to impact our imagination, how we perceive our nations. And maybe this is why the history of Third May Constitution is still hidden, because if we look at this, we would see how revolutionary, how avant-garde Poland was at the time. And we have certain myths about Poland, I believe, and they are still being perpetuated in schools, for example. We always talk about weak, extremely weak Poland that was just, you just needed to barely touch Poland so that it would fall. But let's think about the armies that were needed to take down Poland. They are comparable to Napoleon campaigns from 500,000 troops from all directions. So that would translate to millions and millions of soldiers today. I think Poland would fall today too if it was invaded by 5 million soldiers from all directions. So I think there are certain myths that maybe have roots in Stalinist times, when the aristocracy was perceived as pure evil and guilty of all Poland's failures.
It's persistent. You mentioned Ignacy Potocki, but we'll go to a final word to the King, Stanisław August Poniatowski. What's his reputation in the light of modern historical study? He was the last King of Poland, or last Polish King of Poland. He was a very complex character, perhaps not the right man for this job. But what's his reputation now in 2024 amongst Polish historiographers?
Well, he probably tried to do his best, the best he could in the circumstances that were basically walking on the rope. And he probably knew that if he falls off that rope, the consequences will be catastrophic. Sometimes there are certain remarks about Ignacy Potocki, because he was of an opinion that we have to seek friends amongst enemies, and he chose Prussia as the lesser evil versus Russia, that was too mighty already, an overgrown dragon swallowing more and more territories, while Prussia was just a little young wolf. And perhaps the main failure of the king was not being able to see that giving more and more concessions to Catherine is not really going to change anything. And on the other hand, he's undoubtedly one of the two most important authors of the Constitution, next to Ignacy Potocki.
We have to, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. We've run out of time. But thank you very much, Marcin Kaczorowski, for coming onto our programme. Great to have you.
Thank you very much.
That's all we have time for today. Join us again next time for How We Got Here.